All right, today we are jumping into one of the biggest and, frankly, most urgent stories on the entire planet, the global debt crisis.
So what if I told you the global economy is sitting on a debt pile so massive that nobody, not the US, not China, not Europe, actually knows how to pay it back? We're talking about a debt mountain so large, it's now bigger than the entire global economy 3 times over, and it's still growing. And look, this isn't some crazy doom theory. This is the real system we are all living inside, right now.
Okay, so let's put a number on this thing. We're talking about a staggering $337.7 trillion. Now, that's the combined borrowing of every single government, corporation, and household on Earth. To try and wrap our heads around that, the entire global economy, the global GDP, is just over 100 trillion. So yeah, we owe more than 3 times what the entire planet produces in a whole year.
So, how in the world are we going to make sense of this? Well, here's the plan. First, we'll get a grip on the sheer scale of this debt mountain. Then, we'll dig into who actually owes all this money. We'll look at how this monster grew so fast, and the tipping point, when countries actually start to break. And this is the important part. We'll cover how this whole crisis hits you. And finally, we'll look at the 3 most likely ways this whole thing could end.
All right, first up, let's just try to get a handle on how enormous this problem really is. Okay, this chart right here, it tells a really powerful story. You see that blue line? That's global debt. And since the year 2000, it's more than tripled. I mean, you can see it just climbing and climbing, but look at those massive spikes right after the 2008 crash and then again during the pandemic. Meanwhile, that red line, that's our global economy. It can't keep up. We've been borrowing way faster than we've been growing.
And this is what makes it so terrifying. Look, the core problem isn't just the debt itself. It's the fact that the interest on the debt is growing faster than our economies can. And that leads directly to things we all feel. Persistent inflation that eats away at your savings, governments being forced to raise your taxes, and a constant risk of unemployment as companies start to struggle. It creates wildly unstable stock markets, puts our retirement funds in real jeopardy, and ultimately, it threatens to just choke off any real economic growth for a whole generation.
So who on earth owes all this money? Let's peel this massive number apart and see exactly where the biggest risks are piling up.
So this chart breaks down that huge $330+ trillion debt pile perfectly. Now, you might think governments are the biggest borrowers, right? And at $91 trillion, they're definitely a huge piece of this puzzle. But the largest slice of the pie actually belongs to corporations. We're talking a colossal $165 trillion. These companies just binged on cheap debt for years to fund things like stock buybacks and big mergers. And then, of course, you have households, that's you and me, with $59 trillion in mortgages, credit cards, and all kinds of other loans.
And to really grasp the speed of this, just think about this for a second. In only 18 months, the world added 15 times trillion dollars in new debt. That's like adding the entire economy of China, but in new debt. The pace is it's absolutely breathtaking.
And the cost to just service this debt, well, it's becoming crippling. Take the United States. Annual interest payments are about to hit $1.1 trillion. That's more than the entire defense budget. In Japan, interest payments are 5 times larger than what the country spends on education. And major economies like France and the UK, they've now officially crossed into what the IMF calls the danger zone for interest costs.
So quick question for you. What do you think breaks first? Is it government debt, a wave of corporate defaults, or all those household loans? Drop a comment below. I really want to see what you think.
Okay, so how do we even get here? Well, 3 specific global events basically work together to inflate this debt bubble into the absolute monster it is today.
It all really started back in 2008. To save the financial system from collapsing, central banks everywhere slashed interest rates down to 0. Suddenly, borrowing was essentially free. And that kicked off what we now call the easy money decade, from 2010 to 2019, where corporations and households just binged on record levels of super cheap debt. And then the COVID pandemic hit. In just 1 year, governments piled on over $21 trillion in new debt to fund all the stimulus. They didn't just borrow, they borrowed more than ever before in all of human history. And that's what really locked in the crisis we're facing today.
So, okay, we've seen how we got here. But the big question is, when does this all come crashing down? Let's look at the actual tipping point, the warning signs that a country is about to go right over the edge.
There are 5 really clear warning signs to watch for. First,
interest payments start eating up more than 20% of all the tax money coming in. Second, the country's currency starts to fall, and fall sharply. Third, bond yields spike, which is just a fancy way of saying investors get nervous and demand way higher interest payments to lend the government any money. Fourth, foreign investors get spooked and they pull their money out. That's called capital flight. And finally, the last act of desperation. The government just starts printing money to pay its bills.
And this really brings us to the most crucial point of all. A debt crisis doesn't begin when a country actually runs out of cash. It begins when the rest of the world runs out of trust that they can pay it back. It's a crisis of confidence, plain and simple.
Now this map shows you just how widespread this risk really is. That 90% debt-to-GDP ratio, that's widely seen as the danger zone. And as you can see, pretty much every major economy has blown right past it. I mean, Japan is in a league of its own over there, but Europe and the United States are deep in the red too. Let's zoom in on a few specific hotspots. You've got Japan, with the biggest government debt load ever recorded in history. You have Italy, struggling with massive interest costs and almost no economic growth. France has already crossed that IMF red line we just mentioned. And then there's China. The official number is high, but the real number could be something like 3 times larger once you factor in all the hidden local government debt.
Okay, we've been looking at the big, macro picture. But now, let's bring this right back home. How does a massive global problem like this actually affect your daily life and your wallet?
Well, in a debt crisis, there are very few safe places to hide your money. The cash you have in the bank, it loses its purchasing power because of inflation. Government bonds, which are usually a super safe bet, can actually lose value when interest rates spike. The stock market becomes extremely volatile and vulnerable to a recession. And even real estate faces the risk of a serious downturn. Historically, the one asset that tends to perform well through these kinds of crises is gold.
But you know, the impact isn't the same everywhere. Take the United States. In the short term, the US dollar might actually get stronger as global investors flee to what they see as a safe haven. But long term, political gridlock and those exploding interest costs, that's a massive risk. Now, for a fast-growing economy like India, it could actually attract investment from people looking for a growth safe haven. But it also faces its own risks, like higher import costs and a lot of pressure on its currency.
So here we are at a truly historic crossroads. And as we look toward the rest of this decade, there are really only 3 plausible ways this whole crisis could finally end.
Okay, scenario 1 is what we could call controlled inflation. This is kind of the slow burn. Governments let inflation run hot for years, which subtly makes their massive debt pile smaller, but it also quietly eats away at the value of your savings. Scenario 2 is the chaotic path, disorderly defaults. This is where a major country defaults and it triggers a domino effect across the globe, leading to a really severe global recession. And the third and most dramatic is a full-on financial system reset. This is the grand bargain option, where the world's leaders would have to come together, coordinate a massive restructuring of all this debt, and literally write a new set of rules for the entire global economy. Now, each of these paths has absolutely profound consequences for every single one of us. So the final question goes to you. What do you think happens first? The slow burn of inflation, a messy cascade of defaults, or a full financial reset? I really want to hear your take down in the comments. If you found this breakdown valuable, make sure you subscribe for more deep explainers just like this one every week. And if you want to support the channel directly, the Buy Me a Coffee link is in the description, and it truly helps us keep this going. Thanks so much for watching.